So there's a lot of people that were surprised over the fact that I was not over the moon with the new stuff that was brought over to the Gunlance, and I wanted to do a video to give people a little bit of background as to why I feel the way that I feel in regards to this. And there's quite a bit of background to talk about when it comes to this stuff, because the way in which I feel is powered maybe the wrong word, fueled maybe, by my experience over the years throughout multiple video games and the way that I've experienced those video games when it comes to game balance. Because I personally take game balance somewhat seriously, because I think that, you know, things should be reasonably well balanced when it comes to most video games. I know that for some people, they look at that and they're like, oh, who cares about balance? The only thing that matters is if it's fun. And it's like, yes, that will, you know, I'll take that up to a certain point. But after a while, I do start to get frustrated with it. And that's been something that I've been frustrated with throughout significant parts during my gaming experiences over the years. For those of you that don't know, when I started creating content, one of the video games that I was playing the most was World of Warcraft. For those of you that do not know about Blizzard or World of Warcraft, that is a game that, when it comes to balancing, people used to say in the forums that they drop an anvil on a scale, and then they drop a piano on the other side, and they just hope that it kind of evens out. That is not an accurate description of the way that Blizzard does balancing, because that would imply that they actually try, which they don't. A more apt description would be they drop an anvil on one side and a house on the other, and then they hope it balances out, which it never does, because it never works. So as a result, the class that I liked to play in World of Warcraft, which I'm currently not playing, was the Protection Warrior. And over the years, in multiple expansions, Protection Warrior was straight up not viable. Like, you couldn't even play it because it was so fucking bad. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, you could play it. It's just most groups would not take you because your class is bad. You would have to try twice as hard to do the same job that most other tanks, you know, did not have to try. Not even 1/10 as hard as you. Well, I'm 1/10 twice. Whatever. You guys get it. Basically, you have to put in much more effort, and at the same time, you don't even get to do as good results. So this was my experience with World of Warcraft. Now, fast forward to my experience with Monster Hunter. And, you know, I feel like in World and Iceborne, Gunlance was okay. I still complained about it pretty often, but I overall, looking at the way that the Gunlance is right now versus the way that it was in World and Iceborne, or the way that it was in Generations Ultimate, World and Iceborne was actually pretty okay. It was pretty okay. Now, if you look at GU, and GU is important because GU is the same team that is working on this game, I would like to tell you guys what this team has done when it comes to Gunlance during Generations Ultimate. What they did is they added this thing called the heat gauge, which is going to be relevant when we talk about one of the skills that the Gunlance is getting. Now, the way the heat gauge worked is there were 3 stages of the heat gauge, which was like, I think, yellow, orange, and red. And the idea was every time that you would shell, there was a little arrow that would climb up the heat gauge all the way up to red. The problem was if you went overboard, so like if you overcharged or overheated, wherever you want to call it, it would go all the way back down to yellow, and then it would lock you in there for 2 minutes. So how does this work? If it's on yellow, basically there's no bonus. If it's on orange, there was like a 10% bonus or something like that. And if it was on red, there was a 20% bonus in your Gunlance's damage, both shells and melee damage. You guys are like, that sounds like a good thing, you know, requires more skill. Don't you want something that requires more skill? And it's like, yeah, I think that'd be friggin' amazing. See, the problem with this implementation was that before the system, before any calculations are done into the heat gauge, they nerfed damage on the Gunlance across the board by about 20%. So it's like they gave you a gauge to manage just to put you back to where you were before you had the gauge to manage. You guys are like, well, that must mean the Gunlance was really, really powerful in Generations Ultimate, right? No, it was pretty bad. It It was pretty bad. As a matter of fact, the signature ability of the Gunlance, which was shelling, was so incredibly bad that if you go and you look up, like, you don't have to take my word for it, go look at any Gunlance guide for Generations Ultimate, or in this case, you're probably looking at guides for Double Cross, which is the same game, but it's the Japanese version, because most people played it when it was Double Cross, not necessarily when it was Generations Ultimate. But regardless, you go look at any guides for that, and what you'll find in those guides is that most people will tell you that you only use shelling for the gauge. And then after that, your weapon is basically just a glorified poke stick. That's it. So you didn't really use shelling to do damage. Shelling was just used to maintain your gauge. That was it. Because after that, all you really want to do is melee damage, so effectively it stripped the entirety of the identity of the weapon. In Generations Ultimate, that's the way that it worked. So you had the heat gauge. Now, some of you guys might have seen the tweet that I did, where I say, oh, heat gauge is back. Even though there's no gauge, there's no nothing, you know, there's a couple of two new abilities that they've talked about and whatnot. And the reason I say the heat gauge is back is because if you look at the skill that we get right here, which is the Erupting Cannon, this technique involves firing an exploding stake into your target. When using the Eruption Cannon, the tip of the Gunlance heats up and slashing attacks are enhanced for a certain period of time. Now, with the experience that I've had with Gunlance balancing that they've done in the past and all of that stuff, what this tells me is that they're effectively going to somewhat nerf overall melee damage of the Gunlance, and then in order for you to get back to where you were, you're going to have to use the Erupting Cannon. Now, this is my conclusion from my experience with both what this team has done in the past. And I'm not mad about this, because a lot of people seem to believe they're like, oh my god, Rurikhan's salty and he's mad and he's upset. I'm not upset about this, because like I know that I'm going to love this game regardless of what they do with these skills and all that stuff. I want to make sure people understand that. Like, I'm going to be happy as a pig in shit when it comes to playing Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, regardless of whatever happens to the Gunlance or any other weapon. Regardless of that, I know I'm going to love the game. Now, the thing is, I'm someone that, you know, I can deal with a lot of stuff. I mean, come on, I played Gunlance throughout the entirety of Rise, despite the fact of it being, you know, factually the weakest weapon of the game. But it's like, do I really want to play the weakest weapon in the game twice in a row? Not really. Yes, I don't think people can blame me for that, right? I don't think that people can blame me for that. I don't think that's fair. It's like, I want to play a weapon that's powerful too. Like, come on, is that not my right? Just because I main the Gunlance doesn't mean that I don't like playing more powerful weapons. Like, you guys have seen me play Sword and Shield, you guys have seen me play Charge Blade. I mean, you guys have seen me play all the melee weapons because I need to play them in order to do the guides and stuff, right? So, could I be completely wrong about what I'm saying with them nerfing damage of the Gunlance in order to make up for the Erupting Cannon? Yeah, I could be wrong, which is why I said I'm going to check it out. I'm going to see what it's all about. I'm going to see what the weapon feels like. I'm going to see all of that, and then I'll make my decision as to whether or not I want to main the weapon for Sunbreak. But it's like, one of the things about me being as authentic as I am is that I'm never going to fake joy for something that I'm not excited about, you know? And it's like, as much as I love the animation on Erupting Cannon, because basically it feels like a faster worm stake, the implications of it increasing the melee damage of the Gunlance is never going to be something that is going to excite me, because of the fact that this is another aspect of maintenance in this weapon. Slendy says, thank you very much for becoming grossly incandescent. Tip of the hat. Appreciate the support. Thank you. And you guys need to understand that this is already an extremely high maintenance weapon, because unlike most weapons, the Gunlance has skills that I just don't find it particularly fun to play without. For instance, one of those skills is Evade Extender. Very few weapons actually require Evade Extender to play. Like, I can play Sword and Shield fine without Evade Extender. I can play plenty of other weapons fine without Evade Extender because they move reasonably well. They have movement things that, you know, get them to where they need to go. You guys can argue, well, you have Blast Dash. Yeah, Blast Dash will get you to where you need to go, but a lot of times, good engagement on a monster is really going to be about Evade Extender. Like, to give you guys an idea, I value Evade Extender almost as high as Artillery when it comes to playing Gunlance. Like, I literally feel that the weapon is barely playable without Evade Extender because it's an incredibly sluggish weapon. And that's something that you accept. See, that's the thing. Like I said, this is a very high maintenance weapon. So you got to have Evade Extender. You got to have Artillery. You got to have, what is the other one? Load Shells. And these are kind of like your basic, to a certain extent, Evade Extender is an offensive skill. As much as it is a defensive skill for the Gunlance, because positioning is a key aspect of the weapon. Then when you have all these skills that you already need to have in order to make the weapon usable, and then you still have to worry about EFR. I think it's called EFR effect. No, is it EFR? It might be something else. Whatever. You still have to, effective raw. You still have to worry about effective raw damage skills like critical eye, critical boosts, and all the things that go into increasing the melee damage of your weapon. Then you're looking at impossible builds to make. Because either you focus on the shelling aspect of the Gunlance and the usability of the Gunlance, or you focus on, putting in a bunch of crit and stuff. And if you go look, for instance, at speed runs of Gunlance, I think the best Gunlance player that I know is probably going to be Ryu. He's a Japanese player. He's a goddamn god with this weapon. And it's like, I can barely use the builds that he plays because there's almost no comfort skills whatsoever, which makes the Gunlance incredibly hard to play and very specific for very niche scenarios in order to achieve the results that he does with the weapon, which is not something that I really, enjoy doing. I want to feel comfortable when I'm playing the weapon. I don't want to feel restricted with, you don't get Evade Extender, you don't have, maybe you don't get load shells, maybe you don't get something else, right? There's a lot of skills that go into playing the Gunlance. There's a lot of effort that you need to do. And then on top of, the heavy budget skills that you have, even though some people say, oh, but you don't actually need a whole lot to play the Gunlance. You can afford to put a bunch of defensive skills. Yeah, that's because whether or not you put a bunch of raw skills, it makes almost no difference. Like, trust me, I've put a bunch of raw skills on a Gunlance, and unless you're playing Slap Lance, it's whatever. But besides the point, right? On top of all of this skill budgeting and all of this stuff, it's an extremely high maintenance weapon due to the fact that you want to do shell damage. Here's another example, right? You want to do shell damage, you got to use Ground Splitter. Like, that other skill, Hail Cutter, that you'll see me use for memes and stuff, and just like for funsies and jumping around the air and whatnot. Hail Cutter, from an optimal standpoint, is a worthless skill. It's a terrible skill. Costs 2 wire bugs. There's a high probability of it being interrupted. It refreshes your Wyvern Fire, which is an actual damage loss unless you're playing long shelling, at which point it's a net neutral, which means you can Wyvern Fire and you don't lose damage. Like, just actually think about it. One of the signature abilities of the weapon is a net damage loss if you're playing 2 of the shelling styles. Like, if you're playing normal shelling, Wyvern Fire, you lose damage. If you're playing wide shelling, Wyvern Fire, you lose damage. If you're playing long shelling, Wyvern Fire, your damage is neutral. Which means, like, all of the other moves you have in the Gunlance can deal just as much damage as Wyvern Fire. There's also this misconception that some people have, because I've had people tell me this. You can basically Wyvern Fire and knock monsters down. It's like, it's not exactly how that works, but sure. So, there's a lot of downsides to this, right? So anyways, I was saying, Hail Cutter, useless. So the other skill that you have is Ground Splitter. What does Ground Splitter do for those of you that don't play Gunlance? Ground Splitter increases the damage of your shelling by 20%. You guys are like, well, that's a good thing. That's really good, right? Yeah, except before they nerfed the damage of shelling by about 20%. Just like they did back in GU. You don't have to take my word for it. You can check Chaos Slayer's videos. He's done the calculations. He went back to Iceborne, showed the damage of shells in Iceborne, compared it to the damage of shells in Rise. And yeah, they nerfed the damage of shelling by 20% and then gave you Ground Splitter to make up for that. So when you do Ground Splitter, when you maintain the Ground Splitter buff, you're effectively reaching the damage levels that you had back in Iceborne. And it's like, okay, so that's fine. There's a little bit of maintenance that you got to do. with Ground Splitter. That's perfectly reasonable. Yeah, sure, whatever. Here's the catch, okay? Because I've had plenty of people over the last couple of days tell me, oh, you're upset over the amount of maintenance you have to do with your one skill that you have to use. Oh, poor baby. Insect glaive mains, right? Coming out and saying like, imagine us, we have to go get our extracts all the time. Like you're complaining about using one skill. Now imagine if every time you sheathed your weapon, you lost all your extracts. Because that's how Ground Splitter works. Every time you sheath your weapon, you lose the buff. Every time you wirefall, you lose the buff. Every time you, for any reason, you need to move and your weapon needs to go away, you lose the buff. Now, I'm not sure if you've noticed the way that Gunlance plays, but it's sluggish as hell. Guess what? Whenever a monster moves, whenever we need to reposition, we have to sheath. Sheathing loses the buff. You understand now why I'm not particularly excited about another buff that I have to manage? Because I already have to manage Ground Splitter and it's a pain in my goddamn ass, which is the reason why a lot of times you see me play with Hail Cutter. It's just so that I can play the weapon and have fun without having to worry about whether or not I can sheath. You see what I'm getting? You picking up what I'm putting down? Now, I should also mention, because not everything is a bad thing, right? Not everything's a bad thing. Bullet Barrage seems like an incredibly fun skill. It is a skill where your hunter leaps forward and unloads everything the Gunlance has. Wyvern Fire, Full Burst, Worm Stakes. That sounds incredibly fun. It's not AAA, AAA Flare, not AAA, AA Flare, which is what I wanted. But it still looks like an incredibly fun skill. And it's the one thing that I'm like, dude, I really want to see what Bullet Barrage is all about.
Be so grossly incandescent.
But now bear in mind,
shields up, iron breakers.
From the moment you draw your Gunlance, before you can do Bullet Barrage, you need to do, what's it called? Ground Splitter. Because Ground Splitter buffs all of your shelling damage. And you know, most of the damage that is going to come out of Bullet Barrage is shelling damage. So Bullet Barrage is going to be a really fun skill, but doing it without Ground Splitter means a 20% damage nerf across the board, which is not something that you want, right? So there's comes the maintenance aspect of it, and then you're like, and you should probably get Erupting Cannon as well, because that's probably going to buff Wormstake damage, because I think Wormstake is also tied to like the amount of melee damage, or is that only in World? Because they changed it. I don't know if Wormstake is affected by Raw or not anymore, because I don't really slot too many skills for Raw in the Gunlance, because it's just not enough budget. Monalupa, thank you very much for being grossing at us for 7 months. Tip of the hat. Appreciate the support. Thank you. But, you know, there you go. So, I'm going to check it out. I'm going to play it. And I want to make sure that people understand. I'm not mad. I'm not upset. I was just informing people that if I feel that Gunlance is going to be the same thing that it was in Rise, which is to say extremely weak, extremely high maintenance, requires a lot more skill to play than other weapons in the game for a lot less benefit, it's not necessarily something that I'm going to be super interested to play. I'll always be a Gunlance main, and I'll play with Gunlance, and I'll do the guides, and I'll do all of that. But it's like when it comes to taking on more challenging monsters, I'm probably going to take a weapon that is more appropriate, because I don't want to be struggling the whole time like I had to during Rise. I mean, have you guys... I'm actually curious how many people have gone on and killed like Super Allmother with Gunlance. It's not a particularly fun experience, because it does not take into account the amount of maintenance that you have to do. So like whenever you have the opening of Allmother or even just Narwa falling into the ground, and it puts the ramps up so that you can go hit the baby basket, right? Whenever you get that, guess what? I have to choose, do I want to deal less damage, or do I want to waste a significant portion of this opening to get Ground Splitter buff? And I think it's probably the only weapon that has to take that into consideration. Most of the weapons that just go there and they start whacking on it Whereas me, I have to choose, like, well, do I want to actually deal my damage? Is the opening long enough that I can afford to do Ground Splitter? Because keep in mind, you guys are like, well, why don't you just maintain Ground Splitter the whole time? Because she's going to fall, and I'm going to have to sheathe my weapon, and therefore losing Ground Splitter in order to get to the monster. You see what I mean? Try fighting Rathalos with a Gunlance. That's actually fine. I can beat the crap out of Rathalos with a Gunlance. Not a problem. Most monsters, I don't even have a problem fighting them with a Gunlance. Like, I fought everything with a Gunlance, and it's fine. I mean, when I say it's fine, it's like I'll still do it probably in a 30%, 40% faster with a sword and shield easily. But despite the fact that I have way more hunts with Gunlance than I do with sword and shield. But, you know, it is what it is. I just wanted to explain that to people so that people understand. Like, I'm never going to be fake. I'm never going to be like, oh yeah, let's go! Gunlance looks amazing! When I look at the description of Erupting Cannon, I'm like, this looks like Heat Gauge, and Heat Gauge was not a good time. You see what I mean?